Welcome to Lesson 1 of Module 7, Infectious Diseases. In this video, we're going to be looking specifically at pathogens and how they are different, and then also how they can be transmitted between people. So when we refer to a pathogen in this video, we're really talking about a biological agent that causes disease or illness in a host organism. These are infectious diseases that we're talking about here. So they can be spread from one host to another. Non-infectious diseases are not caused by an infectious agent, and therefore not something we'll be focusing on in this video. And the word zoonotic is used to refer to pathogens that are transferred between humans and animals. So there are two categories of pathogens, microorganisms and macroorganisms. So in microorganisms, we have bacteria and fungi. Bacteria is prokaryotic while fungi is eukaryotic. Most bacteria are not pathogenic. However, there are pathogenic bacteria that cause many of our common diseases, such as food poisoning and whooping cough, but can also cause plant diseases. And one example there is the Mycoplasma, which is a parasitic unicellular bacterium, which is transferred by insect pests. But when we look back at food poisoning, something like Salmonella or E. coli is the bacterium that's very prominent in those circumstances. And then we have fungi, which secrete digestive enzymes and other chemicals. And this means that things in their environment, if they're organic matter, tend to break down. In humans, we see skin infections caused by fungi, such as tinea, athlete's foot, and ringworm. We then have oomocytes and protozoa. The oomocytes are organisms that include blight and downy mildew on plants. These are motile cells, which means they're mobile. They're made. The walls are made of cellulose, and they have cellular processes that are not found in fungi. And then we have protozoa, which are unicellular eukaryotes that cause diseases in plants and animals. And Giardia is an example of a protozoa that causes infection. Then we talk about macroorganisms, and these are disease-causing agents that we can see with the naked eye. They're quite large, multicellular. They can live on the inside, so they can be endoparasites, or they can live on the outside of an organism, and these are known as ectoparasites. Some examples of these are helminths, which are a group of endoparasitic worms, and these include intestinal worms such as fluke, tapeworms, flatworms, and nematodes. We then also have a group of pathogens which are non-cellular, and these are non-living agents that require host cells to reproduce. They don't have any metabolism, and they use the reproductive mechanism of the host cell to replicate themselves. These are made simply of nucleic acids, proteins, or both. An example of a non-cellular pathogen are our viruses, and these are very small, so they're usually between 200 and 300 nanometers with a protein case, which can have genetic material of DNA or RNA. Vaccinations, which are used to stop the spread of many viruses, and then plant and animal viruses can be transmitted via mechanical means and through vectors. So the way in which viruses can, in fact, infect people is the process on the right here. So first, it has to attach to the specific receptor site of the host cell, and then it must penetrate that host cell, and that allows the viral proteins to be released into the cell's cytoplasm. We then see the uncoating, where the viral capsid is removed and the genetic material of the virus is released into the host cell. We then see biosynthesis, and this is where the virus will use the host cell to replicate, and then we see the maturation and release, and this is where the viral particles separate from the host cell and assemble into new virions. So here we see that in a picture form, and we can see here that it does increase the amount of the viral genome in the cell. When we talk about infectious diseases, there is a chain of infection. So how the environment, the host, and the pathogen all work as one to cause the disease. So we're going to start on the right-hand side here, where we have our chain of infection, and we're obviously moving from the whether it exits a body and then it must be transmitted to somebody else. So the example here is a handshake. It then must have a portal of entry into the body through a susceptible host. That infectious agent then creates and is in the reservoir. When we talk about the chain of infection, the infectious agent is the pathogen that's capable of causing an infection. Virulence can be used to describe a pathogen's ability to infect and cause harm to its host. A reservoir is where the pathogen normally lives and reproduces, and the port of exit is a pathway a pathogen uses to exit a host and be transmitted to another. When we talk about the mode of transmission, which in the example that we first looked at was the handshake, there's a few different ways to be specific, or actually three, because the first one here is a definition. So transmission is the way a pathogen spreads disease from one host to the next. Direct includes contact between the reservoir and a host. Or the infected host and a new host. So these include things like sexual contact, biting, and fighting. Indirect transmission is through the spread of the disease through the air and dust. And then we have the last one, which are vectors. And these are things such as mosquitoes, fleas, ticks, and flies that also spread disease indirectly. And some pathogens do, in fact, need a vector to complete their life cycle and reach maturity. So we saw here with the port of entry, and it's the same as the port of exit from the previous host. The pathogen must be able to access the type of tissues where it can grow and reproduce. A susceptible host is an organism that will be infected. It depends on genetics, immunity to the pathogen, and overall health. In the flowchart we saw a baby. So obviously the young and the elderly are most common susceptible hosts, but obviously if our immune system is compromised, we do then become susceptible. An epidemic, which is the last part of our video today, is a sudden increase in the occurrence of a particular disease among the population of a given area. So we're seeing the transmission of a particular disease increasing. When it reaches an endemic level, this is the usual level of a particular disease found within a population. It's usually steady and its occurrence does not increase or decrease. However, we can then get a pandemic where a disease reaches above endemic levels on a global scale, and epidemics are occurring across multiple countries or continents. Epidemics can be the result of a change in one or more of the following. So we have a change in the virulence, pathogen being introduced, and host exposure and susceptibility. The virulence of a pathogen is an increase in its ability to infect, and it might be due to mutations, which create new strains of the disease, which is the case with the flu, so influenza. Pathogen introduction, and this is due to our constant migration. There can be, in fact, the introduction of new diseases that the population that was there before was not immune to, and then due to loss of genetic variation or selection pressures, this might cause a population to lose genetic resistance to certain pathogens. That concludes lesson 1. Make sure you tune in for lesson 2.